positions in this one singular area of the body. So it is kind of divided up over 2 chapters overall. We have a little overlap with the upper limb between chapter 4 and 5. Or did I say chapter 5? I'm sorry. That's a bond trigger image. Don't follow the chapters. I apologize. This is all chapter 5 for you guys in Merrill's. My apologies on that. It used to be overlap. It's all chapter 5 for you guys. We're going to be talking about the humerus, the forearm, and the hand and the wrists. All those parts encompass what we call the upper limb. Not to be confused with the shoulder girdle. Shoulder girdle will actually be its own separate chapter. That's chapter 6. We're focused on humerus down to the tips of the fingers for this chapter. Now, keep in mind and take a look at that image, and you have those bones in front of you as well for you to palpate, look at, and get a nice hands-on view of what we're talking about. When we talk about all these parts moving forward, remember, just like last semester, we based everything upon anatomic position. Upper limbs, that's important to remember, because anatomic position is not like this. Remember? What is it like? Palms out. Because of that, the position of these bones do change quite drastically, whether we have the arms like this or like this, i.e. the locations of the fingers and the radius and the ulna in directional terms. So when we look at these in anatomical position, let's start with the forearm. We have the radius and the ulna there. The radius is on the thumb side, ulna is on the pinky side. Radius is also on the lateral side, ulna is on the medial side. Remember that. Very easy concept, one that we often overlook because we forget about anatomic position. Same time, thumb is on what side? Lateral side. Pinky's on what side? Medial. Now I'm saying thumb and pinky, but those are what we call layman's terms again. What's the actual scientific term? First digit, fifth digits. So first digit's on the lateral side, fifth digit's on the medial side. Radius is on the lateral side, ulna's on the, very good, very good. Humerus does not have 2 bones, so we just say the humerus is the humerus. But all these landmarks, we're always going to talk about whether they're on the medial or the lateral side, depending on that anatomic position. For example, we have 2 landmarks here we're going to talk about at the elbow. We have what's called epicondyles. We have a medial epicondyle, we have a lateral epicondyle. By the way, that medial epicondyle, you can palpate right here at your elbow. It's that protrusion, that little rounded protrusion at your elbow. Sometimes we call it the funny bone. We hit the funny bone and it doesn't feel very funny when we hit it. It's actually more humorous than it is funny. Oh, come on, that was a good one. I like that joke. All right. Yeah. But once again, we always look to the medial and laterality of those parts as we talk about. So keep that in mind, and it's always based on anatomic position, even when we're looking at our x-rays. All right, so let's start with the hands and the fingers here, guys. If you look at your hands on your desk, go ahead and pick those up and take a look. I want you to follow along with me and count these parts. Might have to share with some of your neighbors, but make sure everyone can see. Let's start with the phalanges. Now the phalanges are referring to these 3 little divisions of our digits. Let me get my hand out right here. So our fingers are made up of what we call phalanges. We have 3 on all 4 digits, 2 through 5, and 2 on the first digit. We'll look at those a little closer as we move forward. But we have a total of 14 phalanges in each hand. So how many do we have in the entire human body? 28. Write those 2 numbers down. Remember that. One hand has 14 phalanges. Both hands combined have a total of 28 phalanges. And I always say, remember your phalanges. This is really silly and really dumb, but one of my teachers did this. Always remember your phalanges. Phalanges. They're scary phalanges. You do your fingers like this. The phalanges. They're going to see me doing that in your mind. The phalanges.
Taking the test.
14 in one hand, 28 in the entire body. Moving a little bit downward on the hand here, guys. If you look at your hands on your desk, we have this area of the hand right here. You can palpate it on your own hand. This is what I'm pointing to. These are called our metacarpals. We have 5 metacarpals in each hand for a total of 10 in the human body. 1 metacarpal related to each digit. That's the area between the phalanges and the carpals. I'm holding my fingers right here. Those metacarpals. Not to be confused with the part you see right here, the carpals. That's those little tiny wrist bones we just talked about, those little short bones. We have 8 carpals in each wrist for a total of 16 in the entire human body. Very important numbers to remember on all 3 of those divisions. 14 phalanges in each hand for a total of 28 in the body. 5 metacarpals in each hand for a total of 10 in the body. And 8 carpals in each wrist for a total of 16 in the human body. By the way, with phalanges, if we're talking about one singular section of a phalange, such as where I have my finger right here, that's called a phalanx. Phalanx. Plural is phalanges, singular part is a phalanx on the phalanges. Popping those MCP joints, huh? So you see, once again, when you're at the dinner table with your family, you want to see I'm super smart. You don't see I'm cracking my knuckles or cracking my MCP joints. I'm cracking my metacarpal phalangeal joints. It just sounds really sophisticated. Just make sure you actually remember, make sure you actually know the term and don't make something up, you know.
I would be the one to do
Oh, by the way, well, that was a fail. Speaking of phalange, or phalanx, if y'all want to pass those around, these are each singular phalanx in the fingers. You have 3 total on each digit, except for the thumb. That one's within the thumb.
Yeah, I think one of them in the trash.
It's a lost cause.
Here you go, you can pass those around.
This is your stuff, sir.
Yeah, he collected
This is
them
yours.
himself.
No, actually, this is the school stuff. This is not my stuff. Although I like to collect this stuff too.
No, is this
No,
real
it's like showing it to the
stuff?
camera.
Oh, is it real? Oh, no.
I thought you said you found it on the pipe.
I lied. Sorry, I lied. I'm not that.
There you go.
Come on.
You'll be in jail for real stuff.
Now, each of those phalanges, or each phalanx has divisions on it as well as a head, body, and base on those. We're going to look at that as we move forward. All right, so let's talk about those phalanges that you are passing around right now. That's what composes our digits. Our digits are numbered 1 through 5. So we have a lot of overlap there. We have 4 fingers, 1 thumb, but we have a total of 5 digits. That makes sense? 4 fingers, 1 thumb, but 5 digits. Now, as far as the phalanges go, or phalanx, there is 3 in digits 2 through 5, as we look at right here, guys. 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3. Yellow, red, blue. 3 phalanges in digits 2 through 5, but only 2 in digit number 1, which is the thumb. Please remember that. People always forget that the thumb is unique, and it only has 2 phalanges versus digits 2 through 5 having 3 phalanges each. Now, each of these phalanges have a classification depending on their location. So let's look back at 2 through 5. We have what's called remember our directional terms? Yellow, distal phalanx, middle phalanx, proximal phalanx. Distal, middle, proximal. Distal, middle, proximal. Distal, middle, proximal. Except for the thumb once again. And you can see that on your little hands in front of you. The thumb has only 2. It only has a distal and a proximal.
So we have 4 middle ones?
What's that?
So we only have 4 middle ones?
4 middle what?
Phalanges.
We have 5 phalanges. I'm sorry, 5 digits. But there are 3 phalanges on digits 2 through 5, 2 phalanges on digit 1. The phalange is referring to each of these divisions. Phalanges, phalanx.
So she was talking about the 4 middle phalanx then.
The what?
4 middle
Middle
phalanx.
Middle
Because the
phalanx is
thumb
only
doesn't
one.
have
Okay, I misheard you. Yes, yes, I'm sorry.
4.
You're correct, I misheard you. Yeah, there's 4 middle phalanges. That's the plural. Because the thumb does not have one, only a distal and a proximal. Good observation. And of course, all of these phalanges do fall under the category of long bones. People forget that fact as well, Put a star on that, remember that. People always miss that. Even though they're little bones, they're considered long bones because they each have an epiphysis and an diaphysis. And yes, we can see all those divisions on an x-ray. Those of you that did a hand x-ray yesterday probably know what I'm talking about, but you can see all those little phalanges separated by those joints on our x-rays, just like the diagram you see right here.
They're classified as long bones.
Yes, they are. Long bones. Of course, each of those phalanges are separated by a joint. We're going to go over those joints as well as we move forward. And actually, on those worksheets, you can see what I'm talking about as far as an x-ray. There is a hand x-ray mixed in there. You can see those separate phalanges with the joints between them. Yeah. All right, the metacarpals. So the metacarpals, we have 5 of them. That's the area of your hand between the fingers and the wrists, like the palm of your hands or the back of your hand. That's where those metacarpals are located. They compose the palm and the posterior surface of the hand. They are identified by numbers laterally to medially, 1 through 5. The heads of your metacarpals are distal, and they articulate with those phalanges right here. There's the phalange we just talked about. It's a close-up view. Distal, middle, proximal. There's your metacarpal articulating with that proximal phalanx. You see what I'm talking about? Here's the phalanges. Distal phalanx, middle phalanx, proximal. Here's the metacarpal connecting to those phalanges right here. Now, each of these parts have 3 landmarks. Whether we're talking about a phalanx or a metacarpal, we have the head, body, base. Head, body, base. That is shared with your phalanges and your metacarpals, those landmarks. So even though they're not labeled up here, this has a head, body, base. Head, body, base. Head is the most distal portion of each of those. Base is the most proximal. The body's in the middle of the two. So looking on this hand right here, here's our distal phalanx, head, body, base. Middle phalanx, head, body, base. Distal phalanx, head, body, base. I go downward, here's my metacarpal, head, body, base. Making sense? We okay so far? And we do have to identify each of those parts on these diagrams, whether we're looking at a specific landmark or the bone in general.
Are we supposed to write on this?
Yeah, those are for you.
Oh, okay.
Those are your worksheets.
So on the last one that says neck, you can see that as well.
So neck, yeah, so I'm sorry, I did overlook that. The metacarpal does have one unique landmark. Right underneath the head is the neck of the metacarpal, right here. Head, body, base, but also the neck is a much more elongated bone. The more elongated a long bone is, the more likely they'll have one of those necks on them. We'll see that as we move forward. So how many in here knew that your fingers had heads on them? Yes, they do. They have heads, they have bodies, and they have bases. Once again, you know, you want to irritate your sibling or your parents, you know, like someone's pointing at you, wagging their finger, just stop pointing your phalanx at me. Get that phalanx out of my face. All right, now, the most important piece of anatomy in the upper limb right here, guys. Why do I say that? Because of all the anatomy that we're going to go over in upper limbs, even though it's all important, you are guaranteed to have questions on your registry on the carpal bones. Either x-rays, models, or general questions. They love asking about carpal bones. It is essential that we recognize and memorize all 8 of those carpal bones. When I say carpal bones, I'm referring to the bones in your wrists, right below those metacarpals we just looked at. So, looking in comparison here, once again, here's that metacarpal. We're moving downwards. We're moving up the arm. We're in this area right here, right now. There's the metacarpals we just talked about. There is the phalanges right above them. We're still on the same page? Y'all seeing that? Mm-hmm. You can see those wrist bones on your hand models. Right here, there are 8 total carpal bones or wrist bones, and they're composed of 2 rows. We have a distal row of carpals and a proximal row of carpals. Distal row is on top, proximal row is on the bottom. On the proximal row, that's where we're going to start. Proximal row is right here, guys. We have the scaphoid, the lunate, the triquetrum, and the pisiform.
So,
That is how you say it, pisiform. It's the smallest, by the way. The pisiform is the smallest. Scaphoid, lunate, triquetrum, and pisiform. When you do an image review, know those carpal bones. We're always going to ask you about those carpal bones because it's essential that you memorize all 8 of those. By the way, on the scaphoid, write this in your notes. Sometimes the scaphoid can also be referred to as the navicular. There's an alternative name that's not used very often, but sometimes is used, the navicular.
Could you spell that?
Yeah,
Navicular.
Isn't there one of those in the
There is, yes there is. Also, write in your notes by the scaphoid. The scaphoid is one of the most important carpal bones in the body. Why? Because it's the most fractured wrist bone in the body. The scaphoid. The scaphoid is the most fractured wrist bone in the body, which is why sometimes we do dedicated views for that singular carpal bone.
It's here?
It's right here, right under your thumb. Right here, guys. Scaphoid. Or right here. Distal row. That's the row closest to the metacarpals. That's going to be, and this is 2 people mix up all the time, trapezium and trapezoid. Whatever sick person came up with these names decided to make those very similar. Trapezium and trapezoid, capitate and hamate. Now, one way to remember capitate, capitate's the biggest carpal bone in the wrist. It's the captain of the carpal bones. Captain of the carpal bones. Now, how can you remember the order of these? Trapezium and trapezoid. Trapezium's under the thumb, trapezoid's right next to it. If you're going in order from thumb to pinky, which is what I suggest you do when ordering these, I comes before O. Trapezium, trapezoid. I comes before O in the alphabet. That's the easiest way to remember the order of those. And once again, captain of the carpal bones, the capitates, and the hamates.
What kind of joint is that?
Which one?
The trapezoid? Just,
The trapezoid's not a joint.
or what is it? Oh, it's a tendon thing, I think?
It's not like right here.
Yeah, like in between.
The trapezium, which is right here in the thumb, that's where that sellar joint goes. Just talked about.
You said the distal row was closest to what? The elbow?
The distal row is closest to your metacarpals. Proximal row is closest to your radius and ulna.
Is capitate the biggest one out of
Yes, that's why it's the captain of the carpal bones. It's the one in charge. Now, all 8 of these carpal bones are classified as short bones. Who remembers what kind of joints are between these carpal bones? We just talked about it. Between the carpals. Gliding joints. These are all gliding joints connecting them. Now, pick your hand up with me, guys. It helps to look at this and touch it with your fingers. Palpate kinesthetic learning. Look at the wrists.
Oh.
And let's name them together.
I picked my hand up. He was like, all right, pick your hand up.
X-ray vision?
If it helps. Look, you want to look at it from this side, guys, from the palm, as you're following along. You typically do not look from the back side. You look from this side right here, palm side. Starting right here, guys. Let's start right underneath the thumb. We're going to go with the distal row first. Right underneath the thumb, we have the trapezium, trapezoid, capitate, hamate. That's our distal row. Our proximal row, the most fractured, scaphoid, lunate, triquetrum, and the little tiny one there, pisiform. Pisiform.
Oh, this one. Yeah, they pokes out the stick.
Now, one way to remember the lunates, whenever we look at an X-ray on a lateral view, you'll notice that the lunate has a moon shape to it. It looks like a moon. Lunates, lunar. It's moon shaped. These little things you can do like that to help remember those carpal bones. Yes.
For this one, so like on that picture, like the pisiform is like kind of like outwards, like
Yeah.
that.
Yeah, on these little diagrams, the pisiform is like attached to the hamate. It's actually a separate carpal bone, but on these models, it's actually attached so it doesn't fall off.
Does it normally sit in front of the triquetrum or the
It does.
no, the lunate?
You talking about the pisiform?
Yeah, does it sit like in front of it?
It does protrude like that, yes.
Yeah.
Yes. Now, if you look on your hamate, guys, where'd our hamate go? Yeah, hamate right here. Y'all see that little protrusion coming off the hamate? Y'all see that? The little sharp little hook? It's another landmark that we need to indicate. I don't think it's in your book, so I write it in just in case. It's called the hamulus of the hamate. The hamulus of the hamate. Hamulus of the hamate. Yeah, they didn't get very creative with that name either. Correct. Distal row is right under the metacarpals. Distal row is closest to the metacarpals. Proximal row closest to the radius and the ulna. These are your metacarpals.
So
Distal
we're gonna
row,
have to know the heaviness of the hamate.
proximal row.
Where's the,
Right above the radius and ulna.
which one's it? This one?
By the way, go ahead and make sure you write this down as well, guys, because what else do we always mix up? That radius and that ulna.
Yeah.
Radius is always on your thumb side, ulna is always on your pinky side. Write that down 10 times till you remember it, guys. Radius is always on the thumb side, ulna is always on the pinky side. So, talking about directional terms again, guys. What bone in the forearm is the scaphoid closest to? The radius. What bone in the forearm is the pisiform closest to? Always be thinking about how are these related in directional terms, how they're related in the place of the body, anatomical position. They can ask any number of questions related to that. Making sense so far?
And the radius is always bigger too, just in case.
Radius is always
Always
bigger on the
bigger.
wrist side.
Yeah.
If you go to the elbow side, the ulna is bigger.
Right.
The inverse. So be careful with that.
You said that this was the hamulus, right? This one?
That little hook coming out. Right here?
Yeah, on the inside of
Yeah.
the Did they name that after Hamlet?
I have no idea. That's a good question, though. Now, mnemonics. If you're having trouble memorizing those wrist bones, guys, now you don't have to use mine, but you can come up with any crazy wording you want. But come up with mnemonics when it comes to memorizing these large numbers of bones in a piece of anatomy. So, Steve left the party to take Carol home. The most common ones used for wrist bones. Steve,
I sent it in the
scaphoid.
group, y'all. I sent the, with that in the WhatsApp.
Steve, scaphoid, left lunate. V, triquetrum, party pisiform. Just a row, 2 trapezium, take trapezoid, Carol, capitate, home, hamate. Like, you don't have to use that one, you can come up with your own that helps you remember. But when you're having trouble memorizing this stuff, make some mnemonics, it helps you out a lot.
You made this
This one was actually directly from Merrill's, I believe. Yeah, this is one that I use in school. They had for me in school as well. It hasn't changed over all these years, yeah. But you can use any combination of words that helps you remember it the best.
So, 2 would be trapeze. Oh, okay. I have a photo.
All right, so we're going to talk about the joints now, because just because we have landmarks, you unfortunately have to talk about all the joints as well. So when we talk about the joints in the phalangeal area, they're what we call interphalangeal joints. They're in between phalanges, interphalangeal joint. Makes sense with the wording? Or in short speech, IP joints. They're identified by location and digit number. Classification, what we just talked about. They are synovial, they are diarthrotic, which means they are freely movable, and they're of the hinge type, movement type. Just went over a little while ago. So these interphalangeal joints, just like each phalange has a distal, middle, and proximal, well, these have a distal and a proximal. So we have a distal interphalangeal joint, we have a proximal interphalangeal joints. Distal interphalangeal, proximal interphalangeal. Back up again. Distal, proximal, distal, proximal. When we get to the thumb, it's unique again. Because remember how the thumb only had 2 phalanges? It only has an interphalangeal joint. Just the one. So digits 2 through 5 have 2 interphalangeal joints. Digit 1 has only 1 interphalangeal joint. What's the short speech for these? DIP, PIP. DIP, PIP, or dip, pip, dip, pip, and then the thumb has just the IP joints. So dip, pip, dip, pip, dip, pip, dip, pip, ip. There you go.
I would have got his
And just the ip on the thumb. The thumb wants to be all unique and stand out, you know. Yeah, the thumb's a diva. What can you say? Now we're going to talk about all these joints moving closer to the wrist as well. Those are talking about the joints between the phalanges, those interphalangeals. Now what kind of joint is found between the phalanges and the metacarpals? Remember why I say joints? When you're having trouble remembering a joint name, think of the 2 bones coming together. Look at this very closely. Metacarpophalangeal joint. Metacarpal phalange, thus what's the joint called? Metacarpophalangeal joint. Makes sense, right? What's the short script for that? MCP joints. MCP joint. We have 5 MCP joints connecting the metacarpal to each phalange. 5 MCP joints. And they're numbered by the digit, by the way. This is the first MCP, second MCP, third, fourth, fifth. We do that with the ips and the dips, by the way, too, guys. This is our second dip, second pip, third dip, third pip, or if you want to say the full name, I can as well. But y'all get the concept. We have to number those joints accordingly. Why? Well, if I am, what number is it trying to call me? If I am labeling this on an anatomical sheet or as a radiologist or as a technologist, if I say, oh, well, there's a dislocation on the dip, well, what does that mean? There's 4 of them. I need to know exactly which dip you're talking about. So we have to number those accordingly and specifically. Correct. Same with the metacarpals or the phalanges. Well, which metacarpal's fractured? First, fourth, what? Which one is it? You said the metacarpal's fractured, that could be 5 different metacarpals. So you have to be specific with the labeling, just like we have to be specific which side we're labeling as well. Making sense? All right, we will stop right there today, guys. We'll stop right there. I can see your eyes rolling in the back of your head.
The thumb only has a dip.
Huh?
The thumb, it only has a dip.
It has an if.
The thumb is IP joints.
Yeah, okay.
So we'll pick back up with this anatomy on Monday, guys, and we will likely do our first modeling project either Wednesday or Friday next week. I'll let you know which day, depending on how far we get with this anatomy.
So we need to bring the plate over.
Yes.